Hello and welcome to Moneylife. This is Sucheta Dalal.
This week, I'm going to talk about a Washington Post report and, of course, about Life Insurance Corporation, which affects all of us. So, on 25th October, the Washington Post published an explosive investigation alleging that the Indian government had drawn up a plan to channel nearly 3.9 billion US dollars of Life Insurance Corporation's money into Gautam Adani's debt-laden conglomerate. The proposal, allegedly coordinated by the Finance Ministry through the Department of Financial Services as well as Niti Aayog, had wanted LIC to buy Adani Group's bonds and raise equity in several group firms.
This happened just after US regulators accused Adani companies of stock manipulation and fraud. Now, the Washington Post report is based largely on anonymous sources and it self acknowledges that it's not sure how much of this plan to invest was actually implemented, barring one case which they point out, where in May 2025, 5,000 crore was invested in the bonds of Adani Ports. Now, LIC came out with a very strong denial about the existence of any such plan. It asserted that its investments were solely guided by board approved policies, internal due diligence, and regulatory compliance. It even tweeted this. Then it accused the newspaper of trying to tarnish the reputation and image of LIC. That's the interesting part. Keep it in mind. The Adani Group came up with an equally strong denial. It dismissed the claims as baseless and politically motivated. I don't know whose politics. All this is, of course, now routine. We have heard it so many times. And it is so routine that the Washington Post report did not even trigger the kind of reaction that had happened in Jan 2023 when another US based short seller known as Hindenburg Research, who has since closed shop, had come up with a really detailed report on Adani Group companies and how their stocks were manipulated and much more. The issue this time that makes it worth a discussion is that the revelations have reignited concerns about political favoritism and misuse of public saving. Given that LIC manages, like I said, our hard earned premiums, most of us small middle class people, but the storm has blown over. Why? Simple. Hindenburg allegations attracted global regulatory attention, created a political storm. India's Supreme Court even responded to a public interest litigation by constituting what thought was an expert committee to check if the regulator, the Securities and Exchange Board of India, was actually doing its job and investigating properly. The end of it all, everybody got a clean sheet. The Adani Group got a clean sheet, SEBI got a clean sheet, and even while these investigations remain open in other jurisdictions, summons are not being served on the Adani Group, we have wound it up. So the market obviously expects something similar to happen. The overt message this time is neither LIC nor the Adani Group would face any negative consequences, at least not in India. But controversies have a strange way of resurfacing, and I'm going to stick to LIC this time. It has a checkered history of yielding to the whims of government. Now, most of you who have come to invest in Adani stocks have come in post 2020 after COVID and probably don't even know about LIC's history, except that it's got a small amount of publicly listed shares and a stock price that you probably follow. But its history is revealing, and because this dates back to 1958, it's worth talking about because history kind of repeats itself. And forget about you, LIC doesn't seem to have institutional memory, especially about a scandal that is not only very well documented, but it's an example of transparency and accountability in India's financial history. This is the Haridas Mundhra Scandal of 1958, which led to a probe into the roles of the finance secretary, the LIC chairman, forced the resignation of the then finance minister, and cast doubts on the credibility of the Reserve Bank of India governor. At the heart of the scandal was a controversial decision, see the similarity, by LIC to rescue a Kolkata-based businessman by purchasing 1.26 crore worth of shares in 6 obscure companies that he controlled. 1.26 crore in 1958 was a similar kind of nest egg, right? The move was again reportedly made under pressure from the finance ministry. Similarity? It was sold as a way to remove the drag on the market. Here also, they think it's a large group, one of the biggest industrialists, and you need to worry about the country, its image, similar stuff, right? But that scandal, though it became a defining moment in India's financial history, is completely forgotten 70 years later. The parallels are striking, and so are the contrasts. In 1957, LIC was freshly nationalized. It was just 10 years after independence. Jawaharlal Nehru was at the height of his popularity. And guess who exposed the scandal? His own son in law, Firoz Gandhi, who was an opposition MP on the floor of parliament. You can't even imagine it happening today. The government reacted similarly, attempts at deflection, but then there was so much of public outrage. Remember, these were those innocent days when India was just independent. The PM responded to public outrage by ordering a public inquiry under Justice M.C. Chagla, who is legendary. He was then the Chief Justice of the Bombay High Court. And you know what he did? He conducted open hearings which were so widely reported. There were apparently loudspeakers because the crowds were so big. Those were the days when there were no mobiles and videos, only newspapers. So people came there to attend. So when I was researching the book on A.D. Shroff, I discovered that even the legendary J.R.D. Tata used to make it a point to go there once in a while to just hear the depositions. And who was deposing? Each one of them was a legend in his own right. So Justice Chagla, after these hearings, in less than 2 years, this was all wound up, but the inquiry was much shorter. He produced a scathing report which concluded that LIC had indeed acted under extraneous influence, and he described the investment as a grave dereliction of duty and criticized the government for allowing interference in LIC's operations. Nothing stopped over the next 70 years, it's just continued. That's the scandal of India. But that was the first and last time that any government since then has allowed this level of transparency in hearings. In fact, every joint parliamentary committee, even if it's a multi-party joint parliamentary committee, is done behind closed doors, and their final reports actually represent a political negotiation about who to save, who to indict, rather than a hard investigation. So let's look at the decline in transparency over 70 years. The key to Justice Chagla's conclusions, as I pointed out earlier, was the quality of testimony from those associated with the stock market and LIC's investment committee. Now, they had the courage to speak out. Look at any of our industry stalwarts today and the kind of comments they make. Other than praising the government, you won't hear a word of criticism. So who are they? Quickly, H.T. Parekh, legendary founder of the housing finance business in India, was a member of LIC's committee. He had objected to the purchase of Haridas Mundhra shares in writing. K.R.P. Shroff was the president of the Bombay Stock Exchange, then, of course, the monopoly exchange in India. He was on LIC's committee, and he deposed that had LIC been consulted this investment committee, he would certainly not have advised them to touch the shares. Bhagwan Das Govardhan Das, another leading broker also on LIC's committee, pointed out that 1 year before, in 1956 itself, the Bombay Stock Exchange has put up a notice publicly warning investors that some of the shares being hawked by Mundhra were forged. Left to himself, he said he would not touch the shares with a pair of tongs. Look at the words. Now, last was A.D. Shroff. I've written his biography. He was a financial wizard from the house of the Tatas. He described Haridas Mundhra's claim about removing a drag on the market as a cock and bull story. He also pointed out that a majority of the shares were pledged with various banks to give liquidity to Mr. Mundhra. The rest were held by brokers, and the public in general was not even interested. So there was no question of a drag on the market because of these shares. With this kind of damning testimony, it doesn't matter that on the other side, Haridas Mundhra was equally suave, articulate, and his own testimony is also, for those of you interested, worth reading about. It's all in the public domain. Can we expect LIC's investment committee today to display the same courage and integrity that Justice Chagla's report points to? Do its members even possess comparable expertise? And are their names even publicly known? This is a beauty. We don't know who's on LIC's investment committee, and apparently not for want of trying. So in March 2023, Atul Mudani, an RTI activist, sought this very basic information through an RTI application. What are the names of LIC's investment committee members? LIC flatly refused, on what grounds? Saying it was sensitive and confidential. It also cited Section 81D of the RTI Act, which is a clause meant to protect commercial confidence, trade secrets, or intellectual property. Names of committee members. Look at the difference. Look at those committee members coming out and deposing, the kind of deposition. Here, their names are a secret, and mind you, they're all absolutely quiet. So we still don't know because none of them has uttered a squeak. This defiance of LIC is astounding. LIC was nationalized in 1957 to protect policyholder savings. It's now doubly accountable, according to me, because not only does the government control well over 95% of the shares, but it is listed and hence bound by higher disclosure standards. So to hide even the names of those responsible for its investment decisions betrays either deep institutional insecurity or an arrogance born out of political protection. Since the now let's come to this interesting one. Since the ruling party and its supporters routinely invoke the Nehru era and blame Nehru for everything, let's look at the difference in how Nehru reacted to this and now. Government's muted reaction to the Washington Post revelations has to be contrasted and looked at. First, Nehru had the Chagla inquiry to restore public confidence. The Chagla report was hard hitting, nobody suppressed it, hearings were public, and the Chagla report enunciated 7 principles of how LIC should be safeguarded from political interference, which have all been ignored. I'll come to it in brief. Okay. And LIC is denying and stonewalling and using irrelevant clauses of the RTI Act to hide even the names of its investment committee members. Second, 70 years since the Mundhra report, all governments, including every coalition, has institutionalized the opacity of any kind of inquiry. It has allowed regulators and public institutions also to behave like private corporations. So they use the RTI Act in exactly the same manner to the extent that the Act is all but killed. Every political party, doesn't matter all their fire and brimstone in parliament, every political party supports closed door hearings. And mind you, I have been writing about this since 92, that joint parliamentary committee hearings should be out public like the US Senate hearings. All of us should watch it. It should be televised. If today court cases are televised, I don't see why JPC hearings are not, but you will not find even opposition politicians demanding this and fighting for it. So RTI Act is defanged. Politicians do not want transparency. What about the 7 guiding principles? They read like relics of a more idealistic era. Some of them dealt with appointments, ethical conduct, blah, blah. But what he warned is that states must not interfere with autonomous statutory bodies. And if it did, it must take full responsibility for the directions that it gives LIC. In a parliamentary democracy, he said, Parliament should be informed at the earliest stage to avoid embarrassment from other sources of information. Never happens. You have leaks, you have short sellers coming out with explosive data. All you have is denial, and the whole machinery gets together to suppress and, in fact, tarnish the person, the whistleblower, or the person making the allegations. So, the vision that Justice Chagla talked about is long vanished. Successive governments have embraced the wielding of discretionary powers over public institutions with impunity. And we now have the Chagla Commission of 1958, which I told you completed its inquiry in 2 years flat with challenges. It remains India's first and last true public trial of a financial scandal. Isn't that a shame? LIC's journey from the Chagla Commission to the Washington Post expose mirrors India's broad decline in institutional independence. Transparency and accountability, once demanded by Parliament and forced by inquiry, is replaced by bureaucratic stonewalling. Reclaiming institutional integrity will require a return to Justice Chagla's forgotten principles of public scrutiny and moral courage. Moral courage not just in governance, but among people who are in positions of responsibility. Unfortunately, today I'm going to end on a negative note because I just do not see that happening. The reason to talk about it is that you should be outraged about it and demand change. Maybe slowly, all our public outrage will make change happen because it's about us and it's important to us. Thank you.